Hi there, my name is Andy Frost, and it's great to share with you this morning looking at how we connect faith sharing and social action. Some of my thoughts I'm going to share this morning are a kind of small snippet of a booklet I'm putting together, looking at how we do this effectively with lots of different ideas for churches and church unity groups. In 1942, the Belbridge's report was an attack on the 5 great evils of want, disease, ignorance, squalor, and idleness. And in that moment, the welfare state was birthed. And the church, in many ways, was relieved of its duties for the poor and the marginalised as the government stepped in to fulfil that role. The church's focus was now simply to look after people's spirituality, the state of their souls. Jump forward almost 80 years, and the church is back delivering services on an unprecedented scale. In 2013, more than 10 million people in England said that they or their family had accessed community-based services provided by the church. And in 2020, the House of Good report estimated that the church's total contribution in the UK is at least £12.4 billion each year. And then there was COVID. And during the various lockdowns in my role with Gather nationally, but what I do here in London as well, I've seen how the churches have stepped up to really provide for their communities in these challenging times. Stories of food provision, of grief counselling, delivery services, telephone befriending, debt counselling, mental health provision, and the list goes on. The church is uniquely placed to make a difference practically. Our congregations are spread right across the country. We have an incredible reach in some of the poorest communities and some of the most affluent communities, in city centres and in rural villages. Local churches are embedded. We have assets on the ground with buildings and volunteers. We understand the needs of our communities. And we're in it for the long haul, not just whether or not we win the next election. We have ready-made communities to invite people to belong to. And over the last decade of austerity and more recently the pandemic, both national government and local authorities have seen the significant role that the church plays. But I have a concern that 20 years from now, the church could lose what it is to be the church and could just become a very good social action group in society. The theologian C. Rene Padilla from South America, who died recently, helpfully coined the phrase integral mission, arguing that social action and evangelism are essential and indivisible components. He explains it almost like there's 2 wings on an aeroplane, and you need to have both wings if you don't want to crash. He draws from Matthew 22, love your neighbour as you love yourself, that great commandment. And then the Great Commission in Matthew 28, therefore go and make disciples of all nations. His biblical framework for mission has been adopted globally by charities like Tear Fund. They write, integral mission is the church living out its faith in Jesus in every aspect of life. It's recognising that people are more than their hunger or despair. They're complex and precious, made in God's image, and they're loved. Integral mission is answering God's call to love one another completely. The term is used in global mission, but I think it must become a phrase we adopt for home mission here in the UK as well. Because ultimately, this is what Jesus modelled for us. There are so many examples in the Gospels. We'll just take one, Luke 5. Jesus meets a man with leprosy. He touches the man, reaffirming his humanity. He heals the man dealing with a physical disease. And then he tells him to go to the priest so that he can worship again and be part of the faith community. Integral mission, this great command and this great commission. There are many tensions in the church that we often need to try and resolve, but this is a tension that we need to hold. The tension between social action and evangelism. And it can be a challenging one. I think there are 3 main hurdles we need to explore as the church to really move this thing forwards. The first hurdle, and I call them hurdles because they can be overcome, is this: the funding dilemma. How can we help people find Jesus if the project has civic or grant funding that does not allow proselytizing? The funding dilemma. Second of all, the moral question. Is it right to share the gospel message in words if the people we are working with are vulnerable and there is a power imbalance? And hurdle number 3, the collaboration confusion. How can we be evangelistic if there are other stakeholders? And unpack these 3 more in this booklet I'm putting together. But here are just 5 thoughts to think about. Number 1, language is key. As we engage with civic authorities, one of the biggest issues we have is language. Civic authorities often don't understand faith, and the church community can often fail to understand civic speak. It's important that we explain why we do what we do. As Christians, it helps to explain that our faith is what drives us to do what we do. We should not shy away from this. Chris Kandiah with Home for Good has done a brilliant job in the area of adoption, exploring more of the father heart of God. But he writes this: God in the Bible is really clear that he is particularly concerned about vulnerable people. He sometimes talks about the widow and the orphan, those who are both at the beginning of life and at the end of life, those who are particularly vulnerable because there aren't enough structures around them to care for them. We need to know our why as a church. Why is it we do what we do? Maybe it's as simple as a phrase like, we are serving because this is what Jesus would do. Or, we're out to love people as God loves people. In our language, it's really important that we make it clear that the services we are providing are inclusive. We serve people no matter what their religion, or whatever their background, or whatever their life choices. Number 1, language is key. Number 2, bigger isn't always better. We can think more money, more volunteers, more profile. Surely this is the thing to do, to make our projects even bigger. But it's really important to think through this. Will accepting this grant or this support dilute the mission of the project? Language is key. Bigger isn't always better. Number 3, be aware of who you are working with. There is a power imbalance. We may see clients as our equals, but if we are serving a fundamental need, such as food, or invaluable support around parenting skills, then there can be an imbalance here. We need to be conscious of this power imbalance. We also need to be aware of our relationships with clients. As help is offered, a client may think that the love they are being shown is an opportunity for a close friendship. When there is a presumption of close friendship, this sense of obligation to make some kind of commitment to Christ can appear very real. Clients should be in control. They should feel they are able to direct any next steps regarding exploring the Christian faith, and that they are able to say no. We don't serve our communities with the sole aim of making disciples. We serve our communities because that is what it looks like to follow Jesus. Even if there's no response, or even an antagonistic response to the gospel message, we still love the people we are serving and serve as best we can. Language is key. Bigger isn't always better. Be aware of who you're working with. Number 4, keep good accounts. If you are receiving funding from a grant-making trust or from a local civic authority, only ever use the grant for the direct purpose it has been given for. The council should not be paying for us to share the Christian faith. Keeping detailed accounts of how the money has been spent and the results it has achieved is vital. That being said, sometimes we can interpret this as we are not allowed to say anything, ever. We can't even maybe share we're linked to a local church. And this comes to number 5, point 5, the importance of having an honest conversation. That word, proselytization, often comes up when talking with civic authorities, and it's a very loaded term. It's defined as to convert or attempt to convert someone from one religion belief, or opinion to another. From a civic point of view, they may visualize this as trying to compel someone to think in a certain way, or take advantage of somebody in a vulnerable position. They may even imagine this as coercing someone to say or do things they may not want to do. This is not the kind of approach we should ever use, especially when we're working with potentially vulnerable people. Our faith sharing needs to be sensitive. It was also very true when there are different churches working collaboratively on a project. We may all share the same desire to see people come to faith, but methodology is often the sticking point. How do we do this? There will be some churches that think at any moment we should give a 20-minute sermon, whilst there are others who say actually words aren't even that necessary. And so it's really important that with our different projects we have a robust conversation, thinking through what does faith sharing look like in this context that is both sensitive and genuine. Here are some questions perhaps to think through. If asked, is it appropriate to explain that you're linked to a church? Is it appropriate to instigate a conversation about faith? Is it appropriate to invite a client to an event or church service? Is it appropriate to offer prayer? Is it appropriate to explain the Christian faith using a tract? Is it appropriate to share our faith story if asked? Is it appropriate to invite someone to become a Christian? If we fail to have this robust conversation, then there are two main dangers. First of all, everyone's so afraid of saying the wrong thing that nobody ever does or says anything. Or, on the other end of the spectrum, somebody goes off on one and begins to try and proselytize. It's important we have these robust conversations. Number one, language is key. Number two, bigger isn't always better. Number three, be aware of who you're working with. Number four, keep good accounts. And number five, have the honest conversation. So finish off by encouraging you. There are countless stories that show us the power of holding this tension between social action and faith sharing. In many ways, our social action projects are like a shop window into the care and compassion that the church is often known for. Theos did some great qualitative research with the Church of England and published the Growing Good, Growth, Social Action and Discipleship report. They found that social action projects can well lead to church growth as the congregation form new connections in their community and help initiate faith journeys for people. Their research found that three things were really important. Number one, the local church had to be visible. If you're doing your project on the other side of town, under a different name or a different brand, people don't make that connection. Number two, it has to be about a long-term commitment to a community. This isn't a short-term thing you do, but a long-term commitment to a people in a place. And thirdly, and perhaps most challenging of all, is that we need to be adaptable as the church. The more generous and hospitable congregations we are, the more we're able to adapt our styles of discipleship and worship to connect with and integrate people into the church community. I'll finish off with these words from Colossians 4, verses 2 to 6, that Paul writes. Devote yourselves to prayer, being watchful and thankful. And pray for us too, that God may open a door for our message, so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains. Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. Be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversations be always full of grace, seasoned with salt, so you may know how to answer everyone. As you serve your communities, as you look to share Christ relevantly, may you hold this tension well.